Okay, imagine this. A really basic tool in Bitcoin. Something as fundamental as, I don't know, digitally sticking two pieces of data together.
Uh-huh.
Now, picture that tool being switched off, disabled for like over a decade.
Right?
Well, believe it or not, that simple function is now right at the center of a massive debate about where Bitcoin is even heading.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's fascinating how this seemingly tiny technical thing, opcat, which got sidelined way back, could potentially unlock some really major new features.
OKC, right, stands for opcode concatenate.
That's the one. It's now formally proposed as BIP 347. That's Bitcoin Improvement Proposal. For anyone new to this, though, you might have seen it called BIP 420 in some earlier chats.
Gotcha. BIP 347. So OPCAT. It sounds simple enough. It's just an instruction in Bitcoin's code, right?
Exactly. Its original job was just joining data. Like
Yeah.
you have 2 bits of data on the Bitcoin script stack. Think of that as a sort of temporary digital notepad for transactions.
Oh,
And a KeyCat just glues them together. The classic example is taking hello and world, and
yeah.
bam, you get hello world. Digital glue, like you said.
Digital glue. I like that.
Yeah, it works. But while the function's simple, the implications
Hmm.
well, they're huge. We've seen that digging through our sources, everything from really technical breakdowns to, very passionate community threads, it's not just code tweaking.
No, it definitely touches on Bitcoin's identity, doesn't it? Where it's going.
Absolutely.
And that's why this is important for you listening, whether you're like deep in the crypto world already, maybe just curious about ordinals, or even just wondering how these decentralized things evolve.
Uh-huh.
Understanding OPSCAT kind of gives you a fast track into a really key conversation happening right now. It's about a potentially big change.
Exactly. And look, to get our heads around this, we've really cast the net wide. We looked at the tech proposals, the arguments for it, especially from the Ordinals crowd.
Right.
The more cautious takes from, say, core developers and just broader analysis from all over, it gives a pretty rounded picture, I think.
Okay, so our mission here today. Let's unpack OPCAT. What it is, simply put. Why Satoshi himself disabled it way back when.
That's key.
And why there's this big push now to bring it back. Plus, the arguments for and against. We'll try to keep the super technical stuff, manageable.
Sounds good. Let's dive in.
All right. OPCAT, the basics.
So, yeah, at its core, like we said, it takes 2 bits of data on that temporary stack during a transaction.
The scratch pad.
Scratchpad, yeah. And it just joins them. Hello world becomes hello world. Symbol concatenation.
Okay, but here's the kicker. Why disable something so seemingly basic? What was the danger?
Right. So back in 2010, Bitcoin was, really new. Very early days. Satoshi decided to turn off opcat and a couple of other opcodes too.
Why?
Security. The main worry was something called resource exhaustion, basically a denial of service or DOSA attack vector.
Okay, explain that a bit.
The fear was someone could craft these clever scripts using opcat, maybe combined with something like opdup, which duplicates data.
Ah, okay.
And you could end up creating massive amounts of data on the stack, maybe even in an infinite loop. Imagine copying spam over and over until it fills like a gigabyte in memory. That could crash nodes, overload the network, basically grind things to a halt.
Whoa, so it was like an emergency brake, pulling the plug on something that might cause a huge problem before it actually did.
Exactly that. Bitcoin's infrastructure was, fragile then. The scripting wasn't fully understood. Disabling things that looked even potentially dangerous was just prudent. Security first, always been the mantra.
Makes sense. Fast forward a decade plus, suddenly, everyone's talking about OPSI again. Why now? What changed?
Well, a few things converged, really. First, the Bitcoin network itself is way more robust. Things like SegWit and especially Taproot, they've brought in better ways to manage script execution, limits on resource use.
So some of the original fears are less relevant now.
Arguably, yes. Taproot in particular has limits that weren't there in 2010. Second, you've got the whole Ordinals phenomenon, people inscribing data on sats, creating BRC20s.
Right, the JPEGs on Bitcoin thing and more.
Yeah, and the developers doing that are running into the limits of what current Bitcoin script allows. They want more flexibility.
So Ordinals created a demand.
A pretty significant one, yeah.
Hmm.
Third, researchers have dreamt up some really interesting advanced use cases that opcat could enable things beyond just simple transactions.
Okay.
And finally, let's be honest, there's the competitive landscape. Other blockchains have more flexible smart contracts, and there's a feeling, at least among some, that Bitcoin needs to carefully evolve its capabilities too, without sacrificing security, of course.
Okay, so Bitcoin's stronger, new use cases like Ordinals need it, there are cool potential applications, and maybe a little bit of keeping up with the Joneses, blockchain-wise.
That's a decent summary, yeah. It's a mix of technical readiness and new demands.
All right, so let's talk about that promise.
Yeah.
If OPCAT comes back, what does it actually unlock? What new stuff could we see?
The potential is, well, pretty broad. One huge area is advanced covenants.
Covenants, okay, heard that term. What are they, basically?
Think of them as rules you can bake into Bitcoin itself, restricting how specific coins can be spent in the future. Bitcoin has some basic ability now, but OPSAT could make these rules much more powerful and, frankly, easier to create.
So, more control over future spending. Like what? Give me some examples.
Okay, imagine vaults. You lock up Bitcoin, maybe for 6 months. Even if someone steals your keys tomorrow, they can't move the coins until that time lock expires. That's a covenant.
Wow, okay, that's big.
Or inheritance planning. Setting up rules so coins only go to certain addresses after, say, a specific condition is met, may be triggered by multiple signatures after a period of inactivity.
Interesting.
You could also potentially build better ways to recover lost keys, or even set up recurring payments directly on-chain, like a subscription, but native to Bitcoin.
That feels like a whole different layer of functionality than just sending and receiving. What else?
Privacy enhancements are another possibility. OPChat could potentially make things like CoinJoin, the transaction mixing technique.
Yeah, makes tracing harder.
Right. It could make those implementations more efficient. Maybe help with building more advanced zero-knowledge proof systems on Bitcoin, or perhaps more efficient confidential transactions down the line. Less overhead, potentially.
Privacy is always a hot topic. Okay, so security, payments, privacy. What about ordinals? You mentioned they're driving demand. How would OPC help them specifically?
Oh, for ordinals, it could be a game changer. Right now, inscribing data, creating BRC20s, it involves some, let's say, clever workarounds because Bitcoin script wasn't designed for it.
Right, it feels a bit like a hack sometimes.
Kinda, yeah. OPC would give developers a much more direct and likely more efficient way to manage and manipulate that inscription data right there in the script.
So cleaner code, maybe smaller transactions for some ordinal stuff?
Potentially, yes. More efficient inscriptions, maybe new features for BRC20s, perhaps more complex Bitcoin native NFTs.
Yeah.
Things we haven't even thought of yet.
We saw the Taproot Wizards, the folks behind that Quantum Cats Ordinals collection.
Yeah,
They're big proponents, right? They seem to really want OPSAT back.
they absolutely are. They and others in that space see it as the key to building richer, more expressive digital artifacts directly on Bitcoin, leveraging its security.
Okay, and you mentioned something, recursive covenants. That sounds complicated.
It is a bit more advanced, yeah. Recursive covenants are basically spending rules that can, refer back to themselves or build upon each other. This is where things get really interesting. It opens the door to building complex, self-contained systems on Bitcoin.
Like what kind of systems?
This is where the idea of true Bitcoin native DeFi comes in. Decentralized finance.
Ah, the holy grail for some Bitcoin DeFi.
Exactly. With recursive covenants enabled by OPCAT, you could potentially start building things like decentralized exchanges, lending protocols, maybe complex financial derivatives, even self-repaying loans, all running directly on Bitcoin's base layer in a more trustless way.
That's ambitious. It always felt like DeFi was layer 2 territory for Bitcoin. OPCAT could change that.
It could certainly blur the lines and make layer 1 DeFi more feasible, yes. It's a pretty significant potential shift. And it doesn't stop there. OPCAT could also benefit layer 2 solutions themselves.
Like Lightning.
Like Lightning, yeah. And maybe other proposed layer 2s like CatVM, which is explicitly designed around OPCAT. It could enable more efficient and more trustless bridges between layer 1 and layer 2.
Trustless bridges, meaning less reliance on intermediaries or complex setups.
Precisely. Think about trustless withdrawals from layer 2 back to layer 1 without needing pre-signed transactions in the same way. More user control, better security.
Okay. And one last thing you mentioned, developer friendliness.
Yeah, briefly. Tools are emerging, like Script, which aim to make programming with these opcodes, including OPCAT if it's activated, much easier, lowering the barrier for developers to actually build all these cool things we're talking about.
Right, so it's not just the opcode itself, but the tools around it matter too.
Absolutely.
Okay, wow. That's a lot of potential upside. Enhanced security vaults, privacy tools, a supercharged Ordinals ecosystem, maybe even native Bitcoin DeFi, better layer 2s.
It's a compelling list, for sure.
But And there's always a but, isn't there?
Always.
Let's get into the controversy. What are the big concerns? Why are people pushing back against bringing OPCAT back? Let's really dig into the worries here.
Okay, number one concern, echoing the original reason for disabling it, network security. Full stop.
Even with Taproot's limits.
Even with Taproot, some very experienced core developers are, hesitant. They argue that reintroducing any previously disabled opcode, especially one with a history linked to DOS attacks, is risky. It might open up unforeseen attack vectors.
So the ghost of 2010 still haunts the discussion.
In a way, yes. Satoshi's original decision carries weight. It's seen as a warning. There be dragons here.
But hang on, didn't you mention, or maybe I read, that other chains like Bitcoin Cash, they have OPCAT enabled, right? And they haven't imploded.
That's true. And it's a point proponents definitely raise.
Yeah.
Bitcoin Cash and some others use OPCAT. They argue it shows it can be managed safely with the right limits.
So why the extra caution for Bitcoin itself?
Scale and value, mainly. Bitcoin is orders of magnitude larger, both in terms of network effect and the sheer value secured. A security flaw in Bitcoin would be catastrophic in a way it might not be elsewhere. The stakes are just incredibly high.
Fair point. Okay, security is number one. What's next on the worry list?
Block space efficiency, or maybe inefficiency.
The block size debate never truly dies, does it?
Seems not. The concern here is that these more powerful scripts enabled by OPCAT could lead to much larger, more complex transactions.
Bloat, basically.
Yeah, transaction bloat, which puts more pressure on Bitcoin's limited block space. And what happens then?
Fees go up.
Fees likely go up for everyone. And, potentially worse, it could push towards centralization if running a full node becomes too expensive because you need massive storage and bandwidth to handle all this complex data.
I think I saw something about fractal Bitcoin, a testnet maybe, having fee spikes when they turned on something similar.
Yeah, that was mentioned in some discussions. Fractal Bitcoin activated their CAT protocol, which is based on OPCAT, and reportedly saw a jump in fees. It's a small-scale example, but it fuels the concern.
So the very thing enabling cool new features might also make the network pricier and harder for regular folks to participate in fully. That's a tough trade-off.
It really is.
What about the philosophy? You mentioned Bitcoin's identity earlier. Does OPCAT clash with some people's view of what Bitcoin should be?
Oh, massively. This is a huge part of the debate. There's a real philosophical divide.
Okay, lay it out.
On one side, you have the, let's call them digital gold or store of value camp. They believe Bitcoin's primary, maybe only, purpose should be ultra-reliable, censorship-resistant value storage and settlement. Sound money.
Keep it simple, keep it secure.
Exactly. They often see things like ordinals, NFTs, complex scripts as distractions, or worse, as things that could clog the network and compromise its core function. OPCAT, enabling more of that complexity, is seen as a dangerous path.
And the other side?
The other side sees Bitcoin as a potential platform, a base layer that can and should evolve to support more diverse applications, as long as security isn't fundamentally broken. They see things like ordinals and potential DeFi as innovation, keeping Bitcoin relevant.
So sound money versus programmable base layer.
That's a good way to put it. And you have prominent figures on both sides. We saw Luke Dash Jr., a longtime core developer, is very vocal in his opposition, coming from that more purist, keep it simple perspective.
It's a fundamental disagreement about Bitcoin's soul, almost. Beyond philosophy and block space, what about just the unknown, the unexpected problems?
Yeah, that's the unintended consequences argument. Fear of the unknown unknowns. Reintroducing an opcode, especially one that interacts with data size like OPCAT, could create weird edge cases or attack vectors when combined with other opcodes, maybe even ones proposed for the future in ways nobody has anticipated yet.
The more complex the system, the more ways it can break.
That's the worry. Adding complexity increases the attack surface, as security folks say.
And just practically speaking, getting any change like this into Bitcoin, it's not like updating an app, right? The governance is tricky.
Incredibly tricky. It's a major hurdle.
Yep.
You need a soft fork, which requires immense consensus. We're talking thorough, technical peer review, endless community debate, and ultimately broad agreement among miners, developers, node operators, major companies, and users.
It's consensus theater almost.
Pretty much. And the fact that OPCAT's proposal, BIP 347, took a while to even get assigned a number, that tells you something about the process and the level of contention. It's slow and deliberate by design.
Is there a risk that by aiming for more utility, Bitcoin dilutes that digital gold brand that's been so powerful?
That's absolutely part of the philosophical debate. Does chasing features risk the core value proposition? It's a valid concern.
Okay, one last counter argument. Is OPCAT even strictly necessary? Could we achieve similar goals differently?
That's a really important question being asked. Some argue, look, we have layer 2s, we have side chains, maybe other potential script upgrades like OPC-TV or checksig from stack could give us enough new functionality without the specific risks of OPCAT.
So alternative paths.
Yeah. Is OPCAT the best way or just one way, and perhaps a riskier one? The debate is often about finding that optimal balance. Security, efficiency, flexibility. There isn't universal agreement on where OPF falls on that spectrum.
Man, okay. So it's definitely not a simple yes or no. It's tangled up in tech risks, economic trade-offs, deep philosophical beliefs, and the sheer difficulty of changing Bitcoin at all.
You nailed it. That's the landscape.
So where does that leave us? What's the likely path forward for OPCAT, if any?
Well, first, it's crucial to remember the proposal itself, BIP 347, isn't just flipping the old switch back on. It proposes OP-SATA specifically within TapScript, which is the scripting used with Taproot addresses.
Okay, so contained within the newer framework.
Exactly. And it includes specific limits on the size of the data chunks you can concatenate, precisely to prevent those old DOS attack vectors based on exponential data growth.
So built-in safety rails, basically. Trying to address the original sin, as it were.
That's the intention, yes.
Yeah.
Address the historical concerns head on. And then there's testing.
Right, you mentioned fractal Bitcoin. What else?
There's testing happening on Bitcoin Signet, which is a more official test network. People are building things, trying to break things, seeing how it performs under load. This real-world data is critical.
And community efforts, too, like those quantum cats.
Yeah, initiatives like Quantum Cats are partly about demonstrating demand and potential, but also about funding research, getting more eyes on the code, building developer tooling, essentially trying to build momentum and address the technical and social hurdles.
It feels like this whole debate just keeps circling back to that fundamental question.
What is Bitcoin?
Yeah. What should it be? Is it just digital gold, pure and simple? Is it meant to be this programmable base layer for, well, almost anything? Or is it becoming something else, like a cultural platform with ordinals?
That's exactly it. The OPC cat discussion is really a proxy war for that larger battle over Bitcoin's identity and future direction. It crystallizes the tension.
Any sense of a timeline? Is this going to be decided soon, or are we talking years?
Predicting Bitcoin consensus is notoriously difficult.
Yeah.
But we did see that Galaxy research report suggesting that maybe, just maybe, core developers could reach some kind of consensus on OPCAT, or perhaps a similar alternative proposal.
When?
By late 2025. But even then, activation via soft fork would likely take another year or two after consensus is reached. So it's definitely not imminent.
Okay, so still a ways off, potentially. Good to manage expectations. All right, let's try and wrap this up. Key takeaways. OPCAT, this simple digital glue.
Yeah, it promises a lot. More programmability, maybe vaults, and better inheritance tools, a boost for ordinals and NFTs on Bitcoin, potentially enabling native DeFi, improving layer 2 connections.
The whole wave of potential innovation.
Right. But the flip side is serious. Worries about security vulnerabilities returning, concerns about transaction bloat driving up fees and centralizing nodes, and these deep, fundamental disagreements about what Bitcoin's core purpose even is.
It really is fascinating how one little opcode disabled ages ago could potentially reshape so much.
It really touches everything, doesn't it? Security, economics, philosophy, culture, all wrapped up in this technical debate.
Which brings us nicely to our final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Is bringing back OPCAT a necessary evolution for Bitcoin? A step it needs to take to stay relevant, competitive, and unlock that next wave of innovation in the digital world?
Or is it a dangerous detour? A risky move away from its proven core principles of simplicity and security, something that might open Pandora's box and compromise the very things that made Bitcoin successful in the first place.
Yeah, necessary evolution or Pandora's box? It's a big question, and one worth thinking about as this debate continues to unfold.